Black Arts Movement, African American Women's Literature, Dr. Balf Biliveau, Jessica Goen, 2015. What is the Black Arts Movement? An era of literature that saw an influx of African American writing as a whole, inspired by the liberatory goals of both concepts. As Gwendolyn Brooks reminds us, women's writers of the Black Arts Movement entered every literary genre and constructed a language that took poetry to the taverns, streets, bars, housing projects, libraries, prisons, parks, newly founded theaters, and time-honored churches. Language that redirected the conventional expectations of the stage, that interrupted the familiar story told in the autobiography, that introduced new discourses, reconstructed the generic expectations of fiction, and set the premises of theoretically invested essays. Poetry in the Black Arts Movement. The public arts, spoken word poetry, and drama fulfilled another aspiration of the Black Arts Movement, to evoke a consciousness of something called the self, and from that site to create an identity called one people. It was during this time that Black arts poetry and drama, emphasizing the oral and performative traditions of African Americans, particularly such vernacular practices as rapping, signifying, sounding, and running it down, created a public cultural space for the latter emergence of hip-hop and spoken word poetry. Audre Lorde. Naturally is a poem written by Audre Lorde during the Black Arts Movement. This poem embodies what is the Black Arts Movement. There is no doubt that this poem was written to be performed. It develops a particular emotion in the reader, an emotion of anger for the fact that anyone should have to be what they are not. This is why African American women were facing during the Black Arts Movement, and this is Audre Lorde's cry out that she and other African Americans can just be natural. And what about the children? This is another poem written by Audre Lorde during the same time period that is what seems to be in response to her other poem, Naturally. In this poem, she questions what should be taught to her children. She suggests that, at some future date, to have a head that's put on straight. My son won't care about his hair. In this poem, she wants her child to be taught more about actual life things, rather than his hair. This is a major aspect of the Black Arts Movement, that differences be minimized, rather than made into big, major world issues, and that black children are taught the same as white children who would not have to worry about their hair. Short stories in the Black Arts Movement. The black subject, so long a birthing in black communities of the USA, receives prominent narratological rendering, especially in the fiction of black women's writers of the Black Arts Movement. Popular authors of fiction of the Black Arts Movement are Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Cade, Octavia Butler, and Toni Morrison. The Diary of an African Nun by Alice Walker. This is the short story of an African nun who, while truly appreciates the life that she has chosen as a nun, realizes what the Europeans did when they began teaching children in mission schools in Uganda. She was amazed by the lives that they lived and how nice the nuns and priests were, and she wanted to be just like them. It was not until after she was one of them that she truly realized what it meant to be a nun. When she realizes what this means, She believes that her life is over and that she has died. This is the story of a 20-year-old girl who is torn between her commitment to her life as a nun and the life that she gave up in order to be a nun. In the life she chose as a nun, she believes that her life is over and that she's dead, and that she's given up her ability to have children and a family and a husband. This represents the Black Arts Movement by the idea that women, particularly Black women, have choices, and that those choices truly affect them, especially when they were led astray when making those choices. This idea that a Black woman would express her disdain in writing is what women became allowed to do during the Black Arts Movement. Essays in the Black Arts Movement. The designation Black from the middle 1960s throughout the early 1970s represented an emergent identification among nationalists, activists, and intellectuals, and not a generic nomenclature by which any person of African descent might be referenced. Black Romanticism by Joyce Green. This essay by Joyce Green poses a challenge to Black men. This essay defines the search for Black identity. The identity search was very important to writers during the Black Arts Movement. She uses different works of literature to support her claim for the search of identity by the Black man. In her conclusion, she summarizes her challenge. Black men do not have to be the baddest nigger alive in order to be important. There are many levels of the struggle for Black liberation which one can fight. This is just challenging the Black community to fight for what they believe. There are several fronts that they can fight this on, and it does not have to be a physical front. The Black Arts Movement changed everything that the African American women wrote for. They went from being able to write what they saw and what they heard and pure works of fiction to how they really felt, and they were allowed to interject their feelings into their writings, and they were allowed to write poetry or novels or plays or novellas or critical essays, and have a chance to actually influence somebody. And this is why the Black Arts Movement is such a giant piece of African American women's literature.